for the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going over month 7 for the Spring 2021 Sparkle and Shine Mystery Quilt with cotton cuts. So today, if you're doing the large, you've got a bit of work to do. It's not going to take a terribly large amount of time, especially if you do each step for all the blocks all at once. But you're going to make this lovely block right here. It is a beautiful block, but you're going to make 8 of them. You got a bit to make. You got to make 8 of these blocks today. So I think this might be the most work we've ever had to do yet on these monthly blocks, at least for the large quilt. So 8 of these, it seems daunting. They actually come together very, very quick. So I will show you how to build one of these blocks today. For the small, you have a bit less work. You have a total of 4 blocks. You're going to make 2 of these little itty bitty flying geese, and then you're going to make 2 of these larger, like half star blocks. I am very intrigued with this because this design right here, I love this design. Future Jess here. Well, yes, this quilt block is adorable, and I could make a whole quilt with this because it's very cute. It is actually sewn incorrectly. It is supposed to look like this, more like arms and feet, less like a star. So, cute, but wrong. We will go over this more in detail in just a few minutes. I want to make a whole bunch of these blocks. This looks so cool. So just as a reminder, I am doing the quartz colorway in the size large and the garnet colorway in the size small. Signups for this quilt along have ended. They're actually moving on to their fall quilt along now. But if you're still interested in this, you can shoot them an email. I have the email down in the description of this video, and I'm sure they can get you set up if you still want to join in at month 7. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If you like this video at any point, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, anything at all, please leave them down in the comments section. If you are participating in this quilt along, let me know the colorway and the size that you're working on. I am very intrigued in how all of these are going to come together, and I'm starting to think that different colorways are going to look like different quilts even though they're the same pattern. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the quartz colorway in the size small, it's going to have a very different look than the garnet colorway. Like, I think that the colors will make the shapes almost look different. I'm very excited to see this. So let me know what size and what colorway you're doing. All right, guys, let's get started. All right, so starting out with the large, you're going to make 8 of these blocks. Now, it does seem kind of like a daunting task in the beginning, but I'm telling you, it all comes together very quickly. Actually, these 2 blocks right here that make up the whole rectangle are the exact same. So instead of 8 blocks, you're making 16 squares. So you're just making 16 squares and then you just stick them together in the end. So it's really not that bad. So as always, I'm just going to lay out the block design so that I have a good visual, and it just kind of reminds me as I'm piecing it together how it's supposed to go so I don't get all mixed around, which is not difficult for me to do. So the first thing we're going to do is take our A and D triangles and piece those together. So take your A and D triangles as they're going to be when they're done, or you can lay them like this where you have the D fabric and the A fabric just like this, and then lay them right sides together. Make sure you're paying attention to which edge you need to connect them on. Grab some pins and just pin along that edge. Now, if you're just starting with your blocks, you're going to actually do 16 of these. But since I'm just doing 1 block at a time, I just have 2 to put together. So I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So now take your AD units to the sewing machine and sew along these edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once you have these sewn, now we're going to press this seam behind the D triangle. So for me, it's that pink fabric. So I just press along the sewn edge on its own, and then I gently lift up that D triangle and kind of straighten out and finger press that seam, and then I'll gently put my iron over it. And I try not to move my iron around too much because that can stretch out my blocks. I just kind of slide it on there, let it sit there for a few seconds. And then I'll flip my units over and I'll give them a quick press on the back as well, just trying to hold down that seam. All right, so those are pretty much a 1/4 of the block. It's a half of the square, and then you have 2 squares. So once you're done with those, you're pretty much half the way done. Now we're gonna grab a B square and a C triangle, and you can rotate this like the diagram has it, just like this if you'd like. And then we're going to sew along their connecting edge. So we're just gonna lay them right sides together. Use a couple pins to hold them in place if you need to. And then do this for all of your BC units. So you should have 16. Now you can take these to the sewing machine and sew along the pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now take these units and lay them so that the C block is wrong side up. And then we're gonna press this so that the seam goes behind that square. So just like before, I finger press it very gently and try to get it nice and straight. And then I'll just press it with my iron just for a couple seconds and then press them on the back as well. All right, now we just have to add these little F triangles to the bottom. So remember, we're making one large triangle here, so don't add it like that. That's not the shape. This is the shape. There we go. So now we're just going to flip our F triangle right sides together along that bottom edge of our C square. And then we can just pin them together. Do this for all of your units. All right, back to the machine. We're gonna sew along these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once again, we're gonna press this seam behind that C square. So just lay it so that that C unit is wrong side up. And then push it back, gently finger press, and do your best to make sure this all lines up like a triangle. And there we go. Now we have the 2 halves of our squares, and then we'll just put it all together like that. So you're gonna take your 2 large triangles and lay them so that the long sides come together, flip them so that they're right sides together, and they should pretty much be the exact same size. So then grab your pins and just pin along this long bottom edge. And then do this for all of your units. You should have a total of 16 of these squares that you're building. All right, let's sew along these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now take your blocks, and the unit that has the 3 pieces, so the 2 triangles and the square, that's the unit we're gonna put the seam behind. So give that a good press while it's closed, and then press it open, and give it a nice finger press, and then press it with your iron as well. And then for this one, you do definitely want to press it on the back as well, because those seams right in the center here, they kind of bulk up. So you want to get those as flat as possible. There we go. So then do this for all of your blocks. Okay, for the last seam, just make sure you line these up correctly. It's very easy to line them up like that, which would be awesome. I mean, that would be, if you had 4 of these, that would be a really cool looking block, but that's not the pattern. So make sure you line them up per the pattern. My little green triangles are just pointing at each other, and my squares are opposite each other, just like that. So once you have them lined up, go ahead and fold them right sides together. Your seams that are right in the middle should be going in opposite directions, so you can just give them, they can just hug each other. So just like a nice little friendship hug here. So get it all as straight as possible. You might notice that this seam right here is straight, but then the rest of the block is kind of twisted. So just do your best to keep the whole block squared up. It's more important that all of this lines up than this line right here, because if this is straight, but then the rest of the block is crooked, when you press it open, you're gonna have a really wonky block here. So I make sure everything is squared up as much as possible. And then I always pin in the center where the seams are nesting first. And that's just an attempt to get a perfect little corner right here. All right, now let's go sew along this pinned edge at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, after you have that sewn, you can just press the seam. It says to press the seam to the right. Now, you can kind of flip these blocks around in any direction, so I'm just gonna press the seam behind either one of these sides, and then when we build it later, I'll make sure it goes to the right. And there you go, that's your quilt block for the large size, and you're gonna make a total of 8 of those this month. All right, so getting started with the small block, you can see we have 2 blocks to make. We have a larger block, and then we have this smaller block right here. We're actually going to make the small block at the same time as the larger block, because if you see, this smaller block is the same as this block right here on the bottom. So we can just make 2 of those, knock 1 block out of the way, and then continue on this larger one. So as always, I'm just kind of laying out the block design just so I don't forget what it's supposed to look like. And then I'll have these 2 squares on the sides, and let's just focus on these flying geese to begin with. So taking your center D triangle, grab one of your smaller A triangles and just lay it right side along one of the shorter edges of your D triangle. Grab a couple pins and just pin one edge at a time. So we're going to sew these one at a time, and then we'll come back and we'll sew the other side. So do this for both of your flying geese. If you're doing all of the blocks at once, you'll have a total of 4 of these that you're making. Okay, let's go sew along these 2 edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, now take your units and lay them with the smaller triangle wrong side up, so that's your triangle A. Give them a quick press with them still closed, sewn together, and then use your fingers to press that smaller triangle up, and so the seam is behind it. And then just gently press that with your iron. The goal here is to make a rectangle out of these triangles, so you want to keep everything as straight as possible. You don't want it getting too wonky. All right, so now that we have one of the smaller triangles attached to each of these, we're just going to attach the second ones to create our little flying goose. So just take your other triangle, lay it right side down along the remaining short edge of your D triangle. Use some pins to hold these together. And do this for all of your flying geese. All right, now let's sew these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once those are sewn, we're going to press the seam behind these smaller A triangles. So once again, just finger press, and just remember you're trying to make a rectangle here, so don't let it get too wonky and out of shape when you're pressing it. And then once again, just give it a press on the back. All right, so now you can see I have 2 flying geese. One of these is just its own block, so I'll stack that with its buddy over there. And then the remaining one is going to be used in the larger block for the small quilt. So let's just focus on that now. So here are all the pieces laid out. And it's a pretty simple block. Just remember which angle these corners here go, okay? It's easy to kind of mix this around. So just remember they go, I don't even think this is right, is it? But I'm pretty sure I sewed them on incorrectly on this block. See how easy this is to do? So these A triangles are supposed to go up and away, like that. All right. So this is how it's supposed to look. This one is clearly wrong, so I will be unpicking that and fixing it. But moving forward, let's do it the correct way. So let's focus on these 2 little triangles over here and lay them right sides together. These are your A and D small triangles. And then if it helps, grab some pins and pin these together. Now let's sew along these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now flip your little triangle unit so that the wrong side of the D triangle is facing up, and let's press our seams so the seam goes behind the D triangle. All right, now let's lay out our triangles correctly. They go down like this. This is not the part that gets mixed up. It's when you put the 3 strips together that I think that's what threw me off before, so we're gonna try to do it correctly this time. So make sure the A triangles are going from the top outer edge down to meet the center rectangle on the bottom inner edge. And just flip these so that they're right sides together, lining up with the shorter edges of that center A rectangle. Use some pins to pin along these edges. And I'm just going to do both sides at once. All right, let's sew along these 2 pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now for this, we're going to press the seam behind that center rectangle on both sides. So just working one side at a time, move your rectangle up so that it covers that seam. Give it a quick press. And then repeat that for the other side as well. And as always, a quick press on the back is appreciated. Okay, now here, when you lay this back down as your middle strip, it goes like this. This is how it goes. It does not go like this. It's not a star. It goes like this. It goes down. Okay, there we go. So now let's attach our C squares to the sides of our little flying goose on the bottom. So I'm just going to line them up with the short edges of the flying goose. Make sure everything is squared up nicely. Grab a couple pins and just pin along these edges. I'm going to attach both of these at the same time. Okay, now take this to the sewing machine and sew along these two pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, for these B squares, we're going to press the seam allowance behind those. So it's actually the easier piece to press the seam allowance towards, so that will be nice and simple. Just finger press them so that the seam stays behind the squares, and gently press with your iron, and press on the back if you'd like. All right, do your best to get this all lined up the way it goes. Oh, it still does look like a star. It's just a different shaped star, right? This is gonna work. We're gonna be good. So let's start with the bottom 2 rows. Let's lay them right sides together. Again, just double check. We go into the center and down. And I actually like to line up these seams right here on the sides of the rectangle. So our little flying goose here and this center rectangle should be the same size. So when you line up the seams outside of the flying goose and the seams outside of the rectangle on the top, they should be going in opposite directions and they should nest in with one another. So pin at those seams first and then add some pins to the center and also on the ends. Okay, now let's take this to the sewing machine and sew along this pinned edge at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now take your unit and lay it so that the center block, the one with that just rectangle in the middle, is laying wrong side up. And then let's iron that seam and press the seam behind that center row. There we go. So it should all be coming together pretty nicely. All right, now we just have to add the top row, which is just one rectangle. So let's take that and fold it right sides together with that middle rectangle. Pin along those long edges. It should be about the same size. And let's sew along this pinned edge at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And for this final row, we're going to press the seam behind that top rectangle. So lay your unit with that C rectangle wrong side up, and then let's finger press the seam behind that top row, and then just press it with your iron and give it a press on the back as well. All right, so for the small, you should have a total of 4 blocks, 2 that are just little flying geese like this, 2 that look like this one, not this one, although this is very cute. This is a very, very cute block, but it is sewn incorrectly, so I will be ripping these stitches out and reversing that center row and then resewing it. It should be an easy fix, but it should look like this, like a little happy dancing star, like little feetsies and little arms, just like that. That's how it should look. So there we go. If you're making the large, you have 8 of these blocks to do, which is quite a bit of blocks, but it does come together very quickly. And this is going to be cool to see how we use these in the final quilt. If you're doing the small, you have 2 that look like this. Make sure you get that center row or column. I don't know which orientation this is going to have, but make sure you get that center strip to be in the correct position, because this is how it's supposed to look. This is not. I do still love this, but it's not correct. And then you're also going to have 2 of these little flying geese. So I hope that you're enjoying putting together this quilt as much as I am. I still have no idea how it's going to look. I'm very excited to see that in the end. We've only got a couple more months left. Yeah, we got 3 more months left, and then we're going to put it all together, and then we're going to be done. And I think we're going to have a really beautiful quilt. I'm very excited about this. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.